the news.
Hi, I'm Tessa with Brainrot News with a few bits of news for you to choke on for March 19th. The UN just dropped its latest climate report, and in shocking news, we are absolutely, thoroughly, unequivocally cooked. Last decade, hottest on record. CO2 levels, the highest they've been in 800,000 years. We are sprinting towards ecological collapse, like it's an Olympic event. The people in charge don't even pretend to care anymore. Fossil fuel companies are still raking in profits. Governments are still approving new drilling projects like we've got a spare planet lying around. Billionaires are still flying private jets to climate summits to discuss how sad it is that the pores are going to burn. And if they ever get around to doing anything, it's always some half-assed carbon offset scheme that does nothing but make them feel better while the world turns into an oven. But don't worry, I'm sure Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos will swoop in and save us the second they figure out how to make money off of it. And if they don't, well, there's always Mars. Too bad we won't be able to afford a ticket. In Turkey, President Erdogan has decided democracy was cute while it lasted, but now it's time to go full dictator. His latest move? Arresting the mayor of Istanbul, one of his biggest political rivals, because if there's one thing strong men love, it's eliminating the competition. At this point, Erdogan isn't even trying to hide it. He's just running the standard autocrat playbook. Silence the media, jail the opposition, crush protests, and wrap it all up in a nice, shiny package labeled national security. What is the US's response? Nothing, not a zip. Authoritarianism is never a problem when it's happening in a country we do business with, and why would it? We're basically doing the same thing. Erdogan is tightening his grip on power, and the so-called leaders of the free world are watching with all the urgency of a turtle crossing the highway. Sure, let's keep pretending democracy is sacred while we let the fascists do whatever they want. Columbia University has officially signaled that it's willing to comply with the Trump administration's demands to get its $400 million in federal funding back. Faced with the choice between defending academic freedom or bending the knee to political pressure, Columbia seems to have pulled out the world's tiniest calculator and decided that principles are expensive. Among the demands, a ban on masks, because nothing screams freedom like regulating what students can wear, increased campus police presence, because nothing says learning environment like more surveillance, and putting the Middle Eastern, South Asian, and African Studies Department under what is essentially government oversight. Nothing says free inquiry like placing an entire academic discipline under government supervision. If this sounds familiar, it's probably because it rhymes with authoritarianism. And just to be clear, compliance doesn't guarantee that Columbia actually gets the money back. No, that would be too logical. Instead, they might have to keep performing additional reforms until Trump decides they've been sufficiently humbled. That's how education works now. Universities are expected to grovel for funding while pretending this isn't a blatant attack on academic freedom. Other schools are watching closely, not because they admire Columbia's strategy, but because they're trying to figure out how to avoid being the next target. And in other wars that will never end because the people in charge don't want them to, Israel has launched yet another ground invasion in Gaza, this time targeting the Netzarim corridor, a crucial route that cuts the territory in half. If that sounds strategically familiar, it's because dividing a population and forcing mass displacement is a classic occupation strategy. This comes after a single day of Israeli airstrikes that killed over 400 Palestinians, marking a massive escalation after the 2-month ceasefire with Hamas. The official line that this is about dismantling Hamas's control and rescuing hostages. On the ground, it looks a hell of a lot like an occupation strategy dividing the land, cutting off movement and making survival even more impossible for civilians. Defense Minister Israel Katz has signaled more evacuations, meaning tens of thousands of Palestinians will be forced yet again to flee for their lives. Where exactly are they supposed to go? The United Nations is already reporting casualties among its staff and mass displacement of its residents. Gaza has been bombed into near total ruin, and now the Israeli military is carving it up further. Meanwhile, the US government continues its usual routine, expressing concern while writing billion-dollar checks for more bombs. International leaders like French President Emmanuel Macron are warning about the humanitarian disaster unfolding. This isn't just a war, this is an unfolding catastrophe with no accountability. The world keeps watching, the world keeps condemning, and yet the bombs keep falling. We have seen this pattern before. We know how this story ends, and yet it keeps playing out over and over again, while the people in charge pretend they have no idea how to stop it. Trump just pulled another classic dictatorship move, firing 2 Democrats from the Federal Trade Commission because they had the audacity to not be corrupt bootlickers. Why bother pretending to regulate corporations when you can just replace regulators with the people who think the game Monopoly was a guidebook? The message here is clear. Big business gets what it wants, consumers get screwed, and Trump gets to play emperor of America's rapidly declining economy. This is late-stage capitalism at its finest. No rules, no oversight, no accountability. Just a never-ending parade of billionaires hoarding wealth while the rest of us fight over scraps. You better believe this won't stop with the FTC. Every agency that could even think about checking corporate power is back on the chopping block. So get ready for more price gouging and absolutely zero consequences for the people profiting off your misery. Ain't deregulation fun? The Trump administration, with a special guest appearance from Lil Marco the lightweight choker, decided that cleaning up the toxic legacy of Agent Orange in Vietnam was just too generous. So, in the name of fiscal responsibility, USAID got its budget slashed, and the multi-year effort to clean up toxins from Ben Hoa Air Base was put on pause, which is interesting considering the cleanup was put in place during Trump's first presidency, which makes you really question how much Elon knows about anything. Agent Orange wasn't just some overenthusiastic weed killer, it was a chemical cocktail so toxic that it gave generations of people birth defects, cancers, and enough health problems to make a Medicare for All skeptic turn and run. The contamination at Ben Hoa is still sitting there decades later at levels thousands of times above what was considered safe. Hey, at least we didn't stop at abandoning the Agent Orange cleanup. No, we went for the full set, also cutting programs that clear unexploded bombs and provide medical aid to war victims. If there's one thing worse than poisoning an entire country, it's also leaving behind enough live ordnance to make new casualties 50 years after the war ended. After court rulings, some funding for the Ben Hoa cleanup has been partially restored, though the absence of USAID personnel on the ground shows how the project is stuck in limbo. Strategic partnerships and counter-Chinese influence plans hang in the balance. It's a masterclass in how neglecting public health and historical responsibility can erode trust, leaving communities with nothing but toxic legacies and a bitter aftertaste of governmental irony. Ben & Jerry's is once again fighting Unilever, this time over the alleged firing of their CEO David Stever. The ice cream brand, one of the last remaining corporations with an actual moral compass, says Stever was ousted because he wouldn't shut up about progressive activism. According to Ben & Jerry's, this violates the terms of their merger, which was supposed to let them keep their "we actually give a damn" business model intact. But Unilever, being a soulless corporate entity, decided that being socially responsible was just too much work. This all stems from Ben & Jerry's decision to stop selling in Israeli-occupied territories back in 2021, a move that sent most conservatives into a meltdown. Unilever, desperate to avoid any further controversy, seemingly decided it was easier to just gut the company's leadership than let them keep not supporting war crimes. How long before they rename Cherry Garcia to Capitalism Crunch and start running ads about how much they love freedom, the troops, and tax breaks? In what might be the least surprising consequence of Musk hitching his diamond-encrusted, AI-powered, self-driving wagon to Trump, people are setting Tesla dealerships on fire. And honestly, kinda makes sense. Since Musk officially became Trump's little tech overlord, there's been a massive spike in violent attacks on Tesla showrooms. Arson, Molotov cocktails, it's like the French Revolution, but instead of palaces, it's luxury electric car dealerships. You spend years pretending to be a progressive climate hero, and then one day you're throwing cash at Trump's re-election, and suddenly everyone realizes you were just another billionaire grifter with a god complex. Weird how that happens. Law enforcement is calling it domestic terrorism because nothing says protecting democracy like cracking down on the people mad that the richest man on the planet is helping a fascist regime. Maybe, just maybe, if Musk hadn't spent the last few years openly courting right-wing extremists, trying to kill public transit, and turning Twitter into a neo-Nazi daycare, people wouldn't be so eager to chuck Molotovs at his brand. Just a thought. The Trump administration has terminated a program that tracked the abduction of approximately 30,000 Ukrainian children by Russia. These kids were taken from their homes, their families, their country, sent deep into Russian territory, their identities erased, their futures rewritten under the banner of Putin's regime. Trump didn't just ignore this, he actively stopped the effort to track them. The program, run by Yale University's Humanitarian Research Lab, was using biometric data and satellite imagery to locate and return these children. Now, that data may be lost forever, and with it, any hope of holding Russia accountable for what Ukraine has classified as war crimes and potential genocide. Because one act of pro-Kremlin treachery wasn't enough, Trump also suspended U.S. efforts to counter Russian sabotage, cyber attacks, and disinformation. information. Before he took office, U.S. intelligence agencies were running coordinated operations to fight back against Russian interference. But now, National Security Council meetings on Russian threats have all but disappeared. Formal coordination on cyber defense shut down. It's as if Trump is deliberately making the U.S. weaker while giving Putin free rein. Critics warn that this leaves both the U.S. and its allies wide open to Russian sabotage. Trump's administration insists they'll respond decisively if Russia crosses the line. A bold promise, considering they've just erased the very mechanisms that were supposed to prevent attacks in the first place. This is not just corruption. This is the systematic dismantling of America's defenses for the benefit of a hostile foreign power. Elon Musk's shadow government is officially extending its greasy little fingers into US aid, because who better to oversee international development than a bunch of tech bros who think democracy is a dirty word? Jeremy Lewin, an official from Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, has been installed as the Deputy Administrator for Policy and Programs and Chief Operating Officer. That's a whole lot of power for a department that openly tried to shut USAID down. Putting Doge in charge of USAID is like letting a chainsaw run a hospital. But hey, efficiency? Former officials and actual experts, aka people who know what the hell they're doing, are raising alarm bells over conflicts of interest. The whole point of this administration is conflicts of interest. These guys don't even pretend anymore. What's next? Tesla overseeing public transportation? Comment, like, and subscribe so that it becomes common knowledge that I'm not suicidal.